Welcome to another broadcast by the UK Medical Freedom Alliance, the UK's most recognised and respected organisation advocating for every individual's right to informed consent, bodily autonomy and medical choice. We are the UK's voice of ethical medicine.
There's various attempts going on to legalise assisted suicide across the UK and the Crown Dependencies. And the next few weeks see critical and final votes on whether to fundamentally change the relationship between the state and the individual and doctors and patients in this country by making it legal for a doctor to help their patient to end their life. So there were two cautionary tales which recently hit the headlines from Canada, where euthanasia has been enthusiastically adopted and enacted since 2016. And these stories show the feared slippery slope in action, which should be a warning shot across the bows of UK legislators as they debate the assisted dying bill in the House of Lords and the MacArthur bill in Holyrood. So the first story, reported in the Mirror, concerns an elderly Canadian woman who was euthanized against her will when her husband could no longer cope with caring for her. 80-year-old Mrs. B was being cared for at home by her elderly husband, and he struggled to look after her, even with the help of the palliative care team. Mrs. B then expressed an interest in medical assistance in dying, known as MAID, so her husband contacted the referral service. The very next day, a MAID assessor visited and deemed her eligible, but Mrs. B immediately changed her mind. The following day, she was readmitted to hospital, but was denied inpatient palliative care or hospice care. So her husband then requested a second urgent MAID assessment, which deemed her eligible. Now, remember, the first assessor who'd sort of spoken with her, he actually objected and requested a meeting, but that meeting never happened because Mrs. B was euthanized the same evening. So she went from eligibility to death within hours. And I think it's not hard to imagine a similar situation occurring in the NHS once we become desensitized to the deliberate ending of lives. When we cross the ethical Rubicon and allow doctors to kill patients, removing the sanctity of life, because death becomes accepted as a legitimate treatment for suffering, and the system becomes ideologically aligned with death rather than life. And then later that week, another tragic case from Canada hit the news. And this time it was the euthanasia of a depressed 26-year-old man with type 1 diabetes and blindness. I think we can get that headline on the screen. His request for MAID was granted despite strong opposition from his mother. She claimed he wasn't of sound mind because he was depressed. But he was killed without her knowledge or consent, and she only found out 4 days after his death. Now, with the UK assisted dying bill as it stands, the same scenario could happen here because it contains no obligation to inform the family and no safeguards to protect those with mental illness from choosing assisted suicide. So on to the House of Lords, where things are hotting up as they continue to debate Kim Leadbeater's assisted dying bill, which was voted through, if you remember, by only 23 votes in Parliament last June, and key figures such as the Health Secretary Wes Streeting voting against. So the Lords are frustrating the supporters of the bill by giving it the detailed scrutiny that Parliament failed to do. To the annoyance of Kim Leadbeater, peers have tabled over 1,000 amendments to be debated. I think we've got a little slide on that. And then Lord Faulkner, the bill's sponsor in the House of Lords, accused peers of filibustering. He fears the bill will run out of time to complete before the end of this parliamentary session in May, meaning it would fall. However, a constitutional committee report confirmed that the Lords has every right to scrutinise, amend or reject the bill. And as a private member's bill, it is not subject to the Salisbury Convention, which protects government bills promised in their manifesto from being blocked by the Lords. So as Kim Leadbeater's frustration mounts, Sir Keir Starmer is under pressure to do something to force the bill through. She's urged the government to help pass her bill, claiming it is their duty, as they must respect the will of democratically elected members of Parliament. But Sir Keir has insisted the government will remain neutral on assisted dying. Now, the government could make more time for the current bill to be debated, either this session or in the next session if it is reintroduced into Parliament. But Lord Kennedy, who's the chief whip in the Lords, ruled out reintroducing the legislation as a government bill, saying on the 30th of January, "I'm having enough problems getting the government's programme through at the moment, let alone trying to deal with this bill. So I promise, noble lords, that it will not come back as a government bill." So that's reassuring. So then the nuclear option would be for the government to use the 1911 Parliament Act to overrule the House of Lords. This was argued by Lord Faulkner on BBC's Today programme on the 29th of July, and we've got a little video of him.
Why do you believe this requires an unprecedented use of the Parliament Act?
Because what's happening is the Commons, after detailed scrutiny, have decided there should be this major change. The Lords, because of this minority filibustering, will not engage in detail. We haven't even got to the bit where we vote changes yet, because we haven't even got past Section 1 yet. The Constitution says if the Commons passes something and the Lords block it, which is what's happening, then the way the Commons, who are elected, get their way is if they pass it again, second time, in the same form, then it gets through without the Lords. Don't do that, I'm saying to the Lords.
Yes, so as he explained, the Parliament Act would allow the House of Commons to reintroduce a bill at the next session to force legislation through if the Lords block it. This must be the same version of the bill as passed by the Commons in the previous session. And it's worth noting that this act has only been used a handful of times since 1949 to push through government bills against the will of the Lords. For example, the fox hunting ban. So we've seen this growing tension between the supporters and opponents of the bill, who are both accusing each other of acting undemocratically. And here's Kim Leadbeater on ITV talking about this on the 5th of February.
Kim, you, of course, were instrumental in all of this. How concerned are you that this bill will now not pass?
Well, I'm really worried that what we're seeing in the House of Lords is a very undemocratic thing happening, in that we've got a very small number of peers who are fundamentally opposed to a change in the law, a view of which I've always been very respectful, but are very clearly trying to talk the bill out, so stop it going through all its stages that it needs to do to receive royal assent and to change the law, which when we have MPs who took this decision really seriously when they voted for the bill in the Commons, I'm deeply disturbed about the undemocratic nature of what's happening. I was always very clear, and I have a huge amount of respect for the House of Lords, that scrutiny is great and refining the bill where it needs to be refined is fine, but 1,200 amendments, people making multiple repeat speeches, is not a good look for the House of Lords, and I really worry about what the public perception is, many of whom think that the bill has already passed and come up to me on a very regular basis and say, thank you for getting this really important change through.
So it's clear that invoking the Parliament Act will spark fury amongst opponents of the bill, who argue that the Lords are simply doing their job and that the assisted dying bill is fundamentally flawed. The supporters of the bill are reported to be in a blind fury. They're warning Keir Starmer that if he allows the bill to fall, he faces a huge public backlash and would look impotent in the face of the action of unelected peers. So moving on to Scotland, Liam MacArthur's assisted dying bill is facing an imminent vote as early as March. Now, last May, MSPs voted narrowly to proceed with the bill by 70 votes to 56. In the committee stage, several changes were made, including raising the eligibility age from 16 to 18 and ensuring there's no duty on doctors to participate. But many other safeguarding amendments didn't pass. The bill is now on a knife edge, requiring only 7 MSPs to change their position for the bill to be defeated. Several MSPs who previously voted yes are now wavering, citing concerns about inadequate safeguarding against coercion, inadequate protection for healthcare professionals, and the lack of clarity over the actual practicalities of the assisted dying process. And Care Not Killing Scotland, we've got a slide, are urging Scottish voters to contact their MSP urgently in the next 2 weeks to ask them to vote no, which could be critical. This is time critical. And then on to Wales. People may not know this. On the 24th of February, the Senedd will debate and vote on a legislative consent motion on whether NHS Wales should implement the assisted dying bill should it become law. Now, if Senedd votes no, then although the assisted dying would be legal in Wales, it would only be available through private providers or by travelling to England to get it on the NHS. And more than 250 doctors and health professionals, including a former Welsh Chief Medical Officer, Dame Deirdre Hine, signed an open letter to Welsh politicians last month urging them to reject the deeply flawed bill, citing unacceptable risks to patient safety and concerns that it would undermine Welsh autonomy over its healthcare system. And again, we have Welsh voters are urged to contact their Senate members before the decisive vote on the 24th of February, so not long, which you can do easily with this Care Not Killing email tool. And finally, a word about our Crown dependencies. In January, Jersey's state members voted overwhelmingly to approve a draft assisted dying law in principle. And this law's final stage will take place on the 24th of February, again, same date as Wales, when the state members will debate and vote on their amendments. And then finally, in March 2025, the Isle of Man was the first part of the UK to legalise doctor-assisted dying when Alex Allinson's private member's bill was passed in the Manx Parliament. However, much to the annoyance of Allinson, the bill has not been given royal assent yet, despite the approval process normally only taking 3 to 6 months. So he has written to David Lammy to query the delay, believing it's related to the opposition that the Leadbeater bill is having in the House of Lords. If royal assent is granted, it will take 18 months to 2 years of work before the law becomes reality. But the current Manx Parliament ends in September with elections, so Allinson needs to get the royal assent before then.